So I'll start off with my first note, and that being Don Garber mentioning that 63 games this season were played at different times. And that I looked at this one specifically because I think it's a very interesting topic of debate throughout the entire season. And I did a little math, as I
Hmm.
do, because I'm a numbers nerd.
Nerd.
And there were, if my calculations are correct, 493 regular season games. He's saying 63 of those games were at different times. I don't know how he's getting to that number. I don't if each
No,
game counts, huh?
if I remember correctly, he's saying that they used to have 60 plus start dates and times, and then they just switched to Wednesday and Saturday at one time.
Okay, got it.
Good start.
Still, it's the same reason I wanted to have this on here because there was a lot of talk about games being like eight different games being on at the same time and it just being like too much at one time. I personally think that is a valid criticism. I understand you want to have some consistency in terms of when teams are playing so people know when to tune in. But my goodness, can we throw in like a an occasional Friday game, an occasional like early afternoon game? Like, do we need to have, let me do the math. Is it 14 games every weekend? So do we need to have 10 of the 14 or like 12 of the 14 games being played at the same time on Saturdays? It's a little much. Like, I'd rather be spaced out a little bit more. I'd be more willing to watch more games. Instead, you kind of have to tune into like the goal rush, whatever, I forget what they call it,
MLS
360.
360.
I didn't remember if they had like a
We
specific
love
name for
MLS
that.
360.
Instead, you have to tune into 360 because how are you watching eight games at once? Like it's just impossible. Like I wish they would spread it out a little bit more. Throw a few games on Sunday, an early afternoon game on Saturday. Give me a Friday game every once in a while. Like I understand it's hard because you have 5 billion tournaments that you're involved in, but I'm in agreement that it's annoying to have to watch 12 games going on at one time.
No, 100% don't disagree with you at all. I understand where they're coming from. I think 360 was an innovative idea. It was something that they could give a try to. And I don't hate 360. Like once Red Bull finish, I can turn on 360 to watch the Western Conference games and roll with it. That being said, 100% agree with you. I would love to have almost like an NFL like split on Saturdays. You've got a handful of games starting on 7:30 split. A handful of games or even move it up to 7. Don't do 7:30. Go 7 and 9:30, right? And then throw two games on Sunday and one on Friday, right? Split it up that way. I think that's a better way to do that. But I do understand, right? You're going up against NFL, college football. You're going up against, a whole bunch of other different things. So you have to figure out what works best for your attention, and you have to kind of get a feel for, how many of your fans are picking your games over whatever else is happening, right? The amount of people that you see, and again, I know online is not a huge indicator of what the true normal fan is, what I'll call it. The normal fan is, right? But the amount of people who jump on and be like, "Oh yeah, I didn't watch games this week because Clemson UGA were on at 7:30, and that was a game I picked over Red Bull versus Vancouver, whatever, right? Like there's more that goes into it, and it's not going to be a perfect thing, but I completely agree with you to move to different times. Now, I will agree with Don here and say that it has driven. So his comment is that the schedule being consistent drove fan enjoyment, right? And I think what that means, because again, we know that you can't explain everything in your quick little 40-minute press conference. But I think what he's trying to say is you have more people showing up to games. You have more people tuning in on TV because they're not, oh man, I didn't realize that a game was at this time or that time or this time or that time. You know every week what time it's on, and you know every week if you can make it, right? Then the number of attendance in the stadiums has significantly increased when you don't have to play half of your summer games at 1 p.m., right? When everybody else is playing soccer. But I still agree with you, right? I would love to see it stretched out a little bit more and spread out. And I do believe, if I remember correctly, and I don't know if this is in your notes, and I'm jumping you,
I
that
dare
they
you.
are they are planning on adding a Sunday game of the week and like really, really hitting it hard. So that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, but they've already kind of had games on Sunday, so that's not really changing a ton. And I think you make a good point where if you switch it around, you're probably hurting in-person attendance a little bit more.
Hmm.
But I think you're gonna do more for the people watching at home. And I don't know what the contrast in numbers is, whether it's like a significant amount of more people are going in person for games versus watching on TV. But I'm not saying we need a drastic change. Just a couple. Like you could totally throw a game on a Friday and be fine. Like I think people will still show up to the game.
Hmm.
You're not competing with the NFL. You're not competing with college football. Friday, I think you can make one game work in there, and then put two games on Sunday, one game earlier in the day on Saturday. Like I'm not saying you need to like throw half the games on Friday, like a handful on Sunday, and you have like three games on Saturday, but
Hmm.
a little bit more change, I think, would be nice.
No, 100%. Couldn't agree with you more. And again, I'm just, you know me, I always like to look at it from both sides. Why do we do it and how can we make it better, right? So, totally agree. And I do think that as we get a foothold with Apple TV and they get a feel for where their numbers are at, and if they start doing revenue sharing and all that stuff, then they can start saying, okay, we don't really care about the so for example, somebody asked me like, oh, why did MLS Cup get played at 4 p.m. on a Saturday? Right? We all were coaching or watching our kids play. A lot of us didn't see it. We had to watch it back. And I think that was because they had to put it on Fox, that linear, the linear cable channel. And Fox probably only fit it in at 4 o'clock. Whereas once they get a good foothold and say, okay, this is a number. And by the way, it was free on Apple TV too. Like people could have gone on and watched it on Apple TV. But once they get a feel for like, okay, people know where we're at, they know where it is. I think then they start can control when games are played and when they're going to broadcast them. So I
Uh,
have I have hope that that can change. I guess if we're rounding that off.
all right, I have a bunch more notes here, so I don't want to
Yeah,
keep
we should
waffling
we
on
should
about
yeah,
this
I
for
know.
too long.
We could talk about this for hours.